dust in the universe to the waters in the womb I surf. I'm the all in all, from the atoms that exist in the sun to the atom that's in Genesis 1. I'm the all in all, from the first king that walked this globe to the last black slave they stole. I'm the all in all, every living thing you see, all of those things exist in me. I'm the all in all, from the depths of the sea to Mount Everest. Allah in the flesh, most benevolent. This physical form born from melanin. When electrical thought sparked intelligence. Ain't nothing existing I don't exist in. From the clouds in the heavens down to this skin. If you're doing the knowledge, you can follow Jules. In both cases, the basis, water molecule.
What do you think most 15-year-olds spend their time doing these days? Playing Fortnite and making TikToks?
Running the streets, shooting guns. So observe.
Back in 1953, this juvenile delinquent was busy being sentenced to life in prison without parole. He and 5 of his friends had gotten drunk and decided to commit a series of robberies and a crime spree that left 8 men injured, 2 of them fatally. Ligion pleaded guilty to his crime spree in Pennsylvania, one of only 6 states where life sentences for this type of crime are imposed without the possibility for parole.
Without the possibility of parole.
Essentially sentenced to die in prison. The years passed without any light at the end of the tunnel for Ligion. But between 2012 and 2016, new laws dictated that mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. Ligion was offered parole in 2017, but just like Paul Geidel Jr., he declined. He rejected parole, supervised probation, and said he had completely free of the justice system. He may as well just stay in jail. By that point, Ligion had become the world's oldest juvenile to serve life without parole. To this day, he's still behind bars, having served over 67 years in prison.
One on guard in these streets, Charles Edward Ford. Now check out when he got sentenced and how much time he also did in the penal institution.
Charles Edward Ford. In 1952, Charles Edward Ford faced the trial stacked against him from the start. His trial, in which he was accused of a fatal shooting, involved an all-white jury in Maryland 12 years before racial segregation in America.
They were stacking the deck, still to this day.
Witnesses were called to testify, both of whom could vouch that Ford was never at the scene of the crime. 2 witnesses that testified
never at the scene of the crime, and see how much time he got.
He was given wasn't even a trial lawyer, making him unable to adequately defend his client. With those factors combined, Ford ended up receiving a life sentence. After his unfair trial, Charles maintained his innocence, but ended up serving over 64 years in prison before his case was seriously reviewed in 2015. With the evidence finally re-examined, his sentence was vacated, meaning the verdict of his first trial was overruled, having been deemed a miscarriage of justice. That said, he wasn't completely off the hook, as his innocence couldn't be entirely proved beyond doubt. So
they sent him to a nursing home,
a health center in Baltimore in 2016, having reached the impressive age of 86. 64 years is certainly a long time to wait for only partial freedom. But judging by the tears of joy he reportedly shed upon learning of his transfer, Ford was just happy to have his case reassessed in a fairer light. But with his original trial's judgment being so shady, do you think Ford should be compensated for all those years locked away? Or do you think there was Sheldry Top? In 1958, 13 years old, Sheldry Top was involuntarily committed to a state hospital for some seriously destructive mental issues. He was treated with electroshock therapy.
Electroshock they was hitting the young black man with.
It's hardly surprising that in 1962, Top ran away. But in his frenzied state, he wound up responsible for the death of an attorney in Oakland County, Michigan. At just 17 years old, Top was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Despite being clinically diagnosed as a sociopath, Sheldry was held in a minimum security prison, which housed only the best behaved inmates. Despite this, he never attempted to escape. Instead, he completed rehabilitation programs and multiple academic courses, all from behind bars. The years passed Sheldry by without hope of freedom until 2012, when the Supreme Court decided sentencing a minor to life in prison without parole.
He changed the law. Sentencing of a minor is unconstitutional.
In 2019, and seeing as he'd already served a staggering 56 years, it meant he was immediately eligible for freedom. Gaining the title of
56 years.
Serving a life sentence in Michigan, he walked free at the age of 74.
From the time I was born, and that time he did.
School teacher Ada Carey. Christensen's act shocked the state of South Dakota, and after Howard received a life sentence, 3,000 people signed a petition demanding that the boy never be pardoned.
3,000 people signed for him to never come home.
Spending 30 years on and off inside Yankton State Mental Facility. In the 1970s, his sentence was revised, making him eligible for parole. Then in 1995, due to his age and failing health, he was transferred to a nursing home. He died in 1999, age 79, having been institutionalized for just over 58 years before his final 4 years of life. For perspective, he'd spent almost 3 times as long on the inside than he had on the outside.
3 times longer in jail than out.
Spends in his mom's basement, only with less Cheetos and Mountain Dew. Charles Edward Ford faced a trial that was stacked against 1976. America celebrated its bicentennial. The 200th anniversary of the nation saw much celebration, but it was also the year that Richard
bicentennial year, the year I got now.
Served what was at the time the longest prison sentence ever to end in a prisoner's release. He was jailed in 1899 for his role in the demise of
1800s, this dude went to jail.
They didn't print his photo in the paper. They used a drawing.
They didn't even put your photos in the newspaper back then.
Correctional center in Illinois. But that changed after he attacked a deputy warden with a DIY shiv. He received 20 days in solitary confinement before being moved to Menora Penitentiary, where he peacefully spent the final 35 years of his sentence, swapping shivs for baking gloves as he worked in the prison's bakery. He spent a grand total of 64 years incarcerated before he was granted
another
in 1963.
One that spent equality culture 64 years straight behind bars
in over 6 decades. But when you take a look at his first mugshot versus his last, that'd probably take more than a few slices of cake to make up for all those lost years. Paul Geidel Jr. When the aforementioned Richard Honeck was released from prison in 1963, Paul Geidel Jr. was more than 50 years into his life sentence for similarly violent crimes. And when Geidel Jr. was released in 1980, he surpassed Honeck's record by serving 68 years and 8 months in the can.
Almost 69 years, cat did straight.
Suffocated him with the chloroform rag he'd intended to knock him out with. Yeah, right. Accidentally. One call, Geidel Jr. was sentenced to life in prison with a 20-year minimum. Although he became eligible for parole in 1931, Geidel saw through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even the 1970s behind bars. He was finally offered parole in 1974, but having spent more of his life in prison than outside, he declined. Prison had sadly become his entire
He declined to come home after serving 7 years, 7 decades
but before
in
he could see
prison.
the rest of his life pass by from inside of his cage, he was convinced to accept freedom in 1980. By that point, Geidel was 86 years old. He'd spent the best part of 7 decades paying for his mistake. His final days at a nursing home, which, if my grandma's claims are anything to go by,
that's crazy.
Prison. Must have been a home away from home for a lifelong jailbird like Geidel Jr. Johnson Van Dyke Grigsby. When Johnson Van Dyke Grigsby started his prison sentence in 1908, Theodore Roosevelt was the president.
Here we go, another original,
and the first
1908,
recently made.
Before the Ford car was in.
Email was being developed, Motorola was selling the world's first mobile phones, and the floppy disk had been invented. That's a huge chunk of history I've missed out on. But for the crime of fatally injuring a man over a card game in a saloon, Grigsby pled guilty to second-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. He proceeded to serve a hefty 66 years in
another one, 66 years.
From the board a grand total of 33 times, but was denied every last
Denied 33 times at the board.
He transferred to a nursing home in 1974. His almost 90-year-old smile was hiding decades of institutionalization. He'd become completely reliant on the routine and systems of the prison, and after spending time in that Michigan nursing home,
he wanted to go back to jail.
1976.
Let me go out the nursing home and take me.
At just 19 years old, Renee Lima Marin was heading down a dangerous path. In an attempt
give you a modern day one.
He and his friend Michael Clifton robbed 2 video stores at gunpoint in 1998.
Video store.
After their getaway's car's license plate number and their descriptions were given to the police, the 2 were arrested. Lima was sentenced to a staggering total of 98 years in prison. That's a huge amount of time, seeing as no one was injured, let alone fatally. It turns out the prosecutor had dissected the robberies into a series of different actions, including kidnapping, as the pair had forced employees.
See how it could go from one thing to another, and you end up with a bunch of charges.
300-year sentence.
300 years sentence.
Lucky. Even so, Lima was looking at a life behind bars. That was until 2008 when he was released on parole. A clerical error in his paperwork listed him as serving his sentences concurrently, all at the same time, not consecutively, meaning he could be released.
So he got justice and went from consecutive to concurrent.
Started a family and became a model citizen. But in 2014, the mistake was finally caught by the courts and Lima was rearrested. Fortunately, the judge in charge of his case saw the reincarceration as unjust, the ruling was overturned, and Renee
They was getting ready to lock him back up, but the judge gave him a break.
Took steps to apologize face-to-face with one of the store clerks from that fateful night 20 years before. If you were in that clerk situation, would you have been able to forgive Lima after everything that happened?
This is once again God in them streets. Hit the like button, hit the share button. I'm just trying to show y'all youth. You can spend the majority of your life in jail and be 60, 70, 80, 100 years old, and nobody cared nothing about you. You just disappeared to the point that even when they want to release you back into society, you no longer want to come back into society because you're too used to being institutionalized. So don't think that it can't happen to you out there. Don't think you can't commit crimes or be accused of crimes that you might not had committed and do 40 and 30 years in prison. And also the crimes that you do commit, don't think that you're going to do those crimes without there being any consequences. So like I said, always think while you're young. Don't make the mistake of thinking that just this little situation of running around with my crew and doing a stick up can't turn into a murder, which could turn into you doing 40 or 50 or 60 years, or maybe not even coming back home, because a lot of people end up dying in jail. So take heed while you got a chance. This is God in them streets. Hit the share, hit the like button. Make sure y'all get me to these 1,000 subscribers, because I'm going to keep the content coming. I'm not falling into the buffoonism. I'm going to try and do my best to always give y'all something worthwhile. This is for the youth. Like Allah said, save the babies. Peace.